Ragù alla Bolognese is a legendary sauce from Bologna. The word ragù comes from the French verb ragouter, meaning to revive the taste of something. And today I'll share 7 tips to help you take your plant-based Bolognese game to new levels, as well as a recipe for an easy plant-based alternative to Parmesan cheese. And let's start with tip number 1, which is use lentils and mushrooms. Ragù is traditionally made with meat, but if you're a little clever about it, you can recreate the heavy umami flavors and the protein-rich grub of a good ragù by using mushrooms for their umami flavors and lentils as the protein source. You will also need a sofrito, which is the holy trinity of celery, onion and carrot, which is the basis of so many sauces, tomato paste and a solid glass of red wine. And optionally, some aubergine. For the lentils, I would recommend either green lentils or beluga lentils, as they hold their shape quite nicely and gives you a great texture. Red lentils cook out too much and make the ragù very mushy and unpleasant. You can use either dried or tinned lentils. It's both cheaper and consumes less packaging if you cook your own lentils, but sometimes I'm lazy and I get my lentils ready from a tin. If you are using dried lentils, then start by cooking those for 30 to 35 minutes, and if you're using a can, then you won't need to pull it out until the very end. We'll start by making our meatiness in the ragù. I love aubergine and I find that it adds a nice texture to the ragù, but if you aren't a fan, you can leave it out. Mushrooms, however, are a must, and they need to be chopped up into relatively small slices. And then we're gonna add it to a dry pan with a pinch of salt. Tip number 2, dry fry your mushrooms and aubergine. To get the most flavor out of our mushrooms and aubergine, we want them to brown nicely so we can get the caramelized, roasty umami flavors out of them. By frying without oil for the first 5 to 7 minutes, we can reduce their water content, which will make them fry a lot better once we add the oil. While your shrooms are sweating, you have time to chop 2 medium onions, 2 stalks of celery and a large carrot. It should be a relatively fine dice as we want it to cook out into the ragù. And a little bonus tip here, cut carrot and celery first and then the onions, then you won't cry as much as I did behind the scenes. About now, your mushrooms and aubergine should have wilted down and might start sticking a bit to your pot, and that's a sign that they want some oil. Because everything has lost a lot of moisture at this point, we will be able to achieve a much better browning and fond in our pot, and thus a deeper and meatier flavor in our stew. When you find that the mushrooms have browned nicely, you can add your sofrito with another pinch of salt. Which brings us to tip number 3. Give your sofrito the time it deserves. It makes a huge difference if you let your sofrito cook for at least 10 minutes on medium-low. We don't want any color or caramelization, but the onions and celery should become almost translucent and the carrot should start smelling very sweet. Bolognese is a Sunday dish, something that you can make when you have a bit more time to give it the love it deserves. And it is also not something that requires a lot of attention, so you can do the dishes or chop some garlic while it's cooking. When the sofrito has wilted down, you can move it to the side. Add another splash of oil and your chopped garlic. I also add a sprig of rosemary, a teaspoon of chili flakes and a big pinch of oregano and let it fry for about a minute. Tip number 4. Caramelize your tomato and reduce your wine. This ragù uses a lot of tomato puree, about 80 grams, and it needs some time in contact with the oil. Tomato paste contains a lot of sugar, and letting it caramelize completely transforms the flavor from a sour and boring paste into a deep, sweet tomatoey goodness. I then add a tablespoon of soy for an extra umami boost, and then a big glass of red wine. And here I cannot stress enough how important it is that you let the wine reduce. If you just added the wine and water, your ragù would only become sour from the wine. However, if you let it reduce completely, the wine flavor becomes deeper and more tart, and your ragù will be amazing. When it is completely evaporated, you can add your water and a bay leaf. A lot of people might throw in a can of tinned tomatoes as well, but I suggest you try this very simple version with only tomato puree, wine and water, as it creates a very particular flavor that I personally think is unmatched. Put a lid on and then let him cook. It needs at least half an hour, but it only gets better with time, so let it sit for an hour or two on a low heat. Most pasta dishes are not the same without that final grating of Parmesan cheese at the end. But there is a plant-based alternative that does more or less the same thing, as it adds a cheesy, salty umami layer that creates a salty contrast and somehow makes the rest of the pasta taste a little bit more like itself. I call it Parmigiano Vegano. It consists simply of cashew nuts and nutritional yeast, nooch, vegan cocaine, or whatever you want to call it. 50 grams of toasted, unsalted cashews get ground up in a blender, and then meet 15 grams of nooch, as well as salt, pepper, and a pinch of garlic powder. Give it a whiz, and then you have something that looks like store-bought, pre-ground Parmesan cheese. Don't expect that this tastes exactly like Parmesan cheese, but it has a very nice funkiness to it and can be used on all pastas. Your ragu has now been cooking for a while. You have probably gotten quite hungry and you feel like you deserve to eat the ragu that you've been smelling for the last couple of hours. Therefore, it is now time to cook your pasta in some well-salted water. And that leads me to tip number 6. Buy a pasta that is Trafilata al bronzo. This means that the pasta was cut in a bronze mold instead of a stainless steel one. You can recognize the bronze cut pasta by its texture. Pasta cut in stainless steel is completely smooth, whereas the bronze molds leave a more textured and floury surface. This has two advantages. One, it lets the pasta absorb more of your sauce and carry it better. And second, as the pastas cook, they will release more starch into the water, which we can then use to emulsify our sauce at the end. The shape of your pasta is, in my opinion, not too important for this sauce. Traditionally, I think tagliatelle is the most common one, but today I use a shape that is sometimes known as casarecce, the homemade shape, or as strozzapreti, literally priest stranglers. While they're cooking, you can drain your lentils, preferably without getting lentil juice all over your camera, and then add them to the ragu for the last 10 minutes of cooking. When the pasta is 1 minute shy of being done, then save a cup of your pasta water, drain the rest of the noodles and throw them into your ragu. And this brings us to our final tip, number 7. Please, for the love of all the deities, emulsify your sauce with pasta water. Finish your sauce with some Parmesan or Parmigiano Vegano, some pasta water, and then stir it up intensely. The stirring motion makes the starch from the pasta water emulsify with the oil from the sauce and creates a thicker sauce that will adhere better to your pasta and feel better in your mouth. It's super easy, so please do not skip this step. Season with salt and pepper, and then you can serve up your vegetarian ragu alla bolognese with some Parmigiano Vegano and a glass of the wine you unfortunately had to open in order to make the dish. That's Sunday right there.